Well, Sean, thanks so much for the introduction and what's up to everybody who's joining. It's really an honor for me to be doing this for Joe's Black Book because you guys do such important work with young people who have a passion for design. I'm super excited to be speaking with Eunice. I see her as an innovator and an inspiration in the fashion business, whether it's with her namesake brand Eunice or doing great work with the North Face. Eunice, I want to talk about everything that you've done, throughout your career. But to start it off, I think it would be good to go back to the beginning, before DKNY, before Parsons, and talk a little bit about who you were growing up as a young person, and maybe also what your perception of fashion was before you got into the industry.
Mhm. So it's funny because I came to America when I was 5, and from 5 till when I was about 12, I lived in Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan, and then my parents moved us to New Jersey, and I just thought, like, when I was 12, I'm like, I'm a fucking adult and I get my own pizza. I do this. I know my neighborhood. My brother and I, like, we would just do our own thing. It didn't even feel like we had parental supervision. And then you fast forward to being 12 and being stuck in the suburbs and completely having to rely on an adult felt really jarring to me. And I think I felt probably depressed as like a young tween, just feeling this taste of independence get, yanked away from me. And so I think that period was really tough when I first got to the suburbs, because I was like, I don't understand. Like, I wore a Catholic school uniform, and can you just imagine being in a suburb where I went to a grade junior high school where kids were like, let me see how many outfits I can't repeat, like how many times I can wear. And I was just like, I have like 7 outfits. I don't know what these people are talking about. Do you know what I mean? And I was like just awkward, like everything awkward you could ever imagine growing up as a tween. And into teenagehood, like I went to, and the thing about, and, I didn't know this really growing up until you live in a suburb where if you have a high school in your suburb, your property taxes are more expensive. But my town didn't have a high school, so there was an option to either pay to go to public high school or pay to go to a public high school in another town. So my parents actually said, we want you, we sacrificed, came to this country, we want to send you to the best possible school. So I ended up going to a private school, and my parents really struggled to pay for that. And so, like, I still was not, like, didn't know what a loafer was, like, it's weird, like growing up with immigrant parents, that you have to figure out your own path. It wasn't like I'm wearing this cool sweatshirt because my dad wore a cool sweatshirt. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't know what anything was. And it was just, finally going through this awkward period where I felt like I didn't really belong anywhere. And it was a super small private high school. But when I finally got to being a junior in high school is when I finally was like, oh my God, I'm Asian. Like, I am so cool. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't have that sense of, belonging anywhere. And it finally felt like I had that sense of belonging with a group that also felt awkward, and they were all nerds, and, being introduced to new wave music and going to these like Asian dances, and, everyone was wearing black and just stuff. That was my first real introduction to kind of like fashion, or what I thought was fashion, or what I thought as a teenager was super cool. And my parents were super conservative Korean parents. And so I just snuck out of my house clubbing into the city with all my other friends, like any night I could possibly, imagine. So I went to like, all the clubs that, like Nell's and MK and Red Zone and all those amazing places. So when when I was deciding on college, it was like a really tough time financially for my parents. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to go to the state university. I went to Rutgers for a year and a half. And then I decided that, uh, I decided after my first year there that I was like, I'm going to be an artist. You know what I mean? And I didn't even think fashion was like a thing. I didn't know it was a thing. And think about it, back then in the 80s, it wasn't a thing, you know, like, especially from someone who lived in New Jersey, you know? And so, but what I decided to do before I made the leap was go to Parsons Summer School. And that summer was kind of like the big release, you know what I mean? And everyone in the dorms, every fun person was in the fashion department. And I literally, like, I do this thing when I move. I don't care where I move to. I throw all my clothes into a garbage bag. And that's kind of like how I showed up to the Parsons dormitory. But I had like, you know, but it was just, it was like an amazing time. And I was like, oh, you can actually have a career and be creative. It was that sort of connection that I felt like this is the path that I feel like my parents would probably feel better about, that if I did transfer out of this university and going into an art school, that I could actually get a salary as soon as I got out of school versus being a starving artist. So I think like that growing up and feeling the sense of responsibility with your parents coming to America, that I was just like, I know I need to make a salary. I can't depend on my parents, you know, totally sacrificed to get us here, you know? So, so that's kind of how fashion started for me, basically.
That's so awesome. Such a great story. And I'm wondering, you know, when we talk about design school, can you explain a little bit about some of the things that you learned at Parsons? I think for people who are thinking about it, considering, like, what were some of the skill sets that you learned that later on became very important and you're really happy that you sort of got?
Yeah. I actually think the level of discipline that they teach at school was the biggest takeaway, to be honest. Like I definitely, I feel like I wasn't a great illustrator. I wasn't a great sewer. I wasn't really great at a lot of things in school, but what I felt like I was good at was having a lot of street common sense, you know? But when it came to school, like if you were late, like 3 times, you were going to fail the class, you know? It was that kind of thing. They wanted to teach you a sense of professionalism going into anything. Like even I don't know, maybe some of the audience may know this, but I remember like even the way you're supposed to hand a pin over to your boss or whoever's fitting, you know, just that level of what you're supposed to do, versus I think if people aren't trained in a fashion school, I think that those things, you know, people don't understand. So I do also, it's interesting because I think my graduating class was about 65 kids. And I was like only a handful of, there's like 5 or 6 of us who actually, in the end, did menswear. We all start with women's wear, and no one, like maybe 1 or 2 people were like, I want to do menswear, but no one wanted to do menswear. And so, so I think that like, it was just like, again, this weird, like practical thing in me. I was like, okay, how am I going to get a job with these 65 other people? And all of them were going to go after the same jobs in women's wear. And there was only such a small handful of people that school actually was like, I did an internship at Joseph Abood. And they asked, do you want to do your senior project or your senior project in menswear? And so that's how I started my road into menswear. I had such a lovely experience when I interned there, because everybody was lovely. It wasn't crazy. There was something about like my introduction to menswear that felt really great. My senior project was terrible. It was terrible. I didn't even have time to like finish the coat. I think it was just like they barely passed me. I mean, this sounds terrible, right? But at the end of the day, like when you think about, a bunch of my friends would always tell ourselves this. We were just like, yeah, we were like the maybe the B and C students, but it was always like the A students would end up working for us. Kind of, we try to make ourselves feel better about saying those things. But, you know, I do really tip my hat off to like just how hard everybody worked. And what's so crazy was when I finally got my first job, I was just like, this is so easy compared to what we went through at Parsons. Like, we didn't have to stay up all night. I don't care. I don't care if I have to stay up at work till like, you know, 11 p.m. every single night. This is still felt way easier than what we went through at Parsons, you know, just getting through a project. And we would often hang out at a friend's house. We'd like take turns, whoever's house, just to slap ourselves awake to finish projects and then roll into school. And people would be like falling asleep underneath tables, you name it. I don't know. Did other people have this experience, but that's what it was like. So my first job wasn't that difficult. Actually, my first job was at, I literally went to one interview and took the job. Like, that's how weird I was about stuff. But the company went bankrupt. And again, this kind of takes me into why or how I started my brands, because I witnessed so many of these things in my early years as a designer, professional designer. So, but but that company went chapter 11, and I called school and I was like, I need another job. And then they sent me on my DKNY interview, and the rest is history.
Great. And when you were working sort of in the corporate world of menswear, what was that era like, and how is that different than maybe what we see today? And also, what was it like being a woman?
Yeah, it's so funny because all my first bosses were women. And and I guess in New York, they're like, in fashion, there's so many women. And I think only later did it feel like there were more men coming into the industry. Do you know what I mean? On the design and production side. So all around me, I always felt like there were always women. I don't know why. So maybe like the CEOs or the vice presidents would all be men at the time, but like, I always felt surrounded by women. So it just never felt like a thing, I guess. And, you know, my parents were like, just work really hard. And, you know, that's what I focused on in my career, basically. But yeah, even at DKNY, my boss, even though the other two designers and the design director were men, my boss who hired me was a woman. So, yeah.
When you're in that space, what are some of the lessons that you learned that helped you start to develop the business plan and the design language to start your own brand?
Right. So, I mean, this part is the part, like the corporate question that was difficult. And I guess I didn't answer that question, but it felt, DKNY felt like a big enough company where it felt like school. You're back in school again, and you're hanging out with all your friends, and you're working hard together, and you're setting goals to like every fashion show and things like that. It felt so creative because Donna was Donna, you know, she was like, design basically approves everything. So that really influenced everything I did afterwards, or how I think about the importance of design. We sat through we went from concept into like approving every single production piece. And if we didn't approve something, it didn't go through, you know, and that's how, you know, that's what it was like working for a real designer. So I think in that way, it was amazing. I also, after DKNY, DKNY men's, I was just like, ugh, you know, crew necks, polos, V-necks, you know, what else is there to menswear? So I decided, I want to try women's wear. So can you transfer me to DKNY women's jeans team? And so I thought that could be an easy transition for me. But then that was where I learned I don't like women's wear sometimes. You know, it's like this room full of this group of people felt crazy to me, whereas like just the feeling that you get walking into a men's room is totally different. And I just love that so much. And so what happened also, my first corporate experience where it went chapter 11, my second corporate experience at DKNY was, you know, they went public. you know, somewhere in the middle of my time there. And so the first chapter 11 experience, like, you know, people are crying and you're just out of school. You're just like, is this how life is? Is this what's happening? Is this going to happen forever? And, you know, then I land an amazing job and the same thing happens. Like they go corporate, I mean, they go public, and um, they, the first layoff was super hard. And then we didn't realize another one was going to happen. And when the second one happened, we all knew it was going to happen because when we came in, there were boxes in the hallways. And it was kind of like that kind of ruthlessness kind of really was devastating as a young person. And you started to realize, like, what am I going to do when I'm 40? You know what I mean? And I'm older than 40. So I literally was like, what's going to happen? Am I going to, where do old designers go? You know what I mean? Like, where do we go? And that's a really, you know, that was where my mind went in when I was 24, basically. It's like, where do the age designers go? Luckily, I'm still working. I still have a career. But I do think that it is a very ageist industry. So from there, and then I also had like people who I worked with who kind of always fantasized about like starting their own thing. And but they call them the golden handcuffs, right? Once you have a salary and you have a family, how are you going to risk all of that just to start a company? Especially back then, it wasn't like, you know, I don't know if there were venture capitalists, like I don't know how things worked back then, but it was also a time when it was APC and it was Agnes B, and then APC opened, and it was such a wonderful experience. So, you know, when you think about my time at DKNY, like we were such a huge wholesaler, and you know, we'd kill ourselves, you know, doing runway shows and everything, and then you go to Macy's and you're like, this is where our product is and this is what it looks like. You know, how is this? It didn't feel satisfying or gratifying at the end of the day. But when you walked into the Agnes B's and the APCs of the world, you just thought, oh my God, this is an amazing experience. They, you know, when you have your direct store, you know, direct to consumer store. And so I kind of just filed those things away in my head. And after I jumped to my next job, which was for Structure at the time, it actually was also an amazing experience to me, because I felt like, wow, this is how really big direct retailers go. And at a corporate level, like we were flown on private jets. I tell some of the when I was traveling, I was like, oh my God, it's so crazy when I think back to how we were traveling back then. Like my first trip to Asia, I got picked up in a Rolls Royce. Do you know what I mean? Like it was like, where am I? And pick up in a Rolls Royce, and then fast forward to like to a direct retailer where they really sent their staff out to go shop the market. And the way we shopped the market was like, you know, by the time we got to Paris, there was like 2 vans. It was super embarrassing, like having to go into these stores with these gigantic groups of people. But like there would be a team behind us. Like we just shop, throw things on the counter and move on to the next store, because we had to do, you know, I mean, it was work. I was like, after those trips, I was like, I never want to buy clothes again. I never want to go into a store again. But it was this really like well-oiled machine. Like we didn't even have to carry any of the stuff home. Another team literally like came up behind us with a credit card, you know, carrying the bags into another car. We didn't even see the samples until we got back into the office. It was just like a totally different experience. I don't know if they do those things still at the Limited, but it was like seeing the market with serious work, and that was a really interesting experience. And I also had one of my, you know, I also met one of my favorite bosses ever. So inspiring. He was always like your biggest cheerleader on the sideline, just rooting for you and fighting for you and elevating product. And, you know, it was an amazing experience. So I just feel like no matter where I went, I just felt like I always, you know, it was something that always brought me to where I went with Eunice in the end, you know? So all that awful corporate experience of, you know, seeing companies, you know, you feeling like, and especially at a big company, like, you know, you put so much heart and soul into product as a designer, and seeing how ruthlessly cut people are, I think was one of the biggest reasons why I ended up saying, you know, one day I want to start my own brand, and I want to have my own store where I control my own narrative.
Are there any like key moments in the process to opening the doors of Eunice for the first time that really could showcase sort of what it takes to, you know, create your own clothes and open your own retail space?
Yeah, it's so funny because it feels like now, um, it's probably not how people do it, but this is how I did it. You know, it was like with barely any money. My parents had a liquor store on Union Square. You know what I mean? Like I was always like begging for money constantly, just to survive. And we were doing so well the couple of months or the month leading into 9/11. So I opened the store, I guess it was September or something, September-ish, of 2000. And then fast forward 9 months later, 9/11 happens, and all that work that we did, like just starving month to month, like my first month sale might have been like $3,500. The next month sale might have been $6,000. You know what I mean? Every month, just it, there was no marketing. Do you know what I mean? We didn't have money to advertise in magazines or any of that stuff. We literally counted on foot traffic coming in and word of mouth. And, and we were having gangbuster sales, and then boom, 9/11 happened, and there goes that. And, you know, I think that was probably one of the biggest things that I realized what's going to happen to COVID and a lot of small businesses is how long are you going to be able to hang in there, you know? And, if it weren't for the help of my family, I should have been closed right then. But it was having that physical store and being in this amazing, special neighborhood that I was just like, I have to hang on. I don't care what it takes. Like we have to hang on. Um, and so, you know, that was kind of like my experience. But it was funny because we had so little money and it was just so bare bones that I sat in the store a lot, and I learned what guys liked and what they didn't like. They'd be like, who designs this? And I didn't even want to say it was me. I just felt like so shy and weird about it. And later when I would have staff and we could afford to have staff, like, you know, I had one partner and it was him or me, you know what I mean? And I think sometimes he was just getting stoned in the bathroom on the days I wasn't there or something. But it was an amazing time to kind of like have that store. It was still affordable to be able to open a store, you know? When I first got the store space, it was like $3,500. And when the store closed, it was over $16,000, you know? And so how is a small company going to pay that kind of rent in the neighborhood that I was able to open? How are they going to do that? You know, how are you going to really be creative? But I'm hoping actually with the whole COVID thing that there will be a new opportunity, a new time and place for young creatives to come back to cities like New York to be able to do those things.
Definitely. One of the, you know, landmark products that you put out is the Geo. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the development of that product, and specifically like what kind of things did you bring to khaki pants, and, you know, maybe how do you see how that helped evolve, you know, the style that a lot of guys are wearing to this day?
Totally. It's when I first started, I always say that there were two parts to Eunice. The first part one, where I thought I knew I thought I knew stuff, you know, and then having the store made me realize I didn't really know a lot of things, you know. Like I remember my first buying appointment with Barney's, and she and I are like, my friend Leah and I are like, she's one of my best friends. But she literally was like, guys don't like noisy pants. And I was like, what does she know? You know what I mean? Like, what the hell does she know? She has no idea what she's talking about. And then I put the pants in the store, and like, no one likes noisy pants. you know, the guys would like walk around the store trying the pants on, and they did not like those pants. But like, I had this full collection because I thought that's what a designer was supposed to have. And, you know, I did need to fill the store too. But when I, when, when I kind of paused in the collection, I think it's okay for companies and designers to pause, because you kind of reflect and think, what do I want to do? You know what I mean? Who am I? You know, and you end up growing. Think about it, like from 2000 to say 2007, I grew up in that time. And I just started to realize, like, I want to, like, like I feel older. Like the stuff that I was designing when I first opened was, you know, was when I first opened, like, it didn't feel like New York. Everyone's like, oh, is this a brand from California or something? And so I just started to have this more self-awareness and just a more mature taste level too, that I started doing a lot more production out of Italy. And got, you know, if you've been to Italy, a lot of guys wear slim pants and slim chinos and slim colorful pants. But at the same time, it kind of all happened at the same time. And I have a really good friend, and his name is Giovanni. And back then we used to call him Gio. And he is a slightly shorter guy. And he say, dude, you need to make me a pair of skinny chinos. Like, and skinny, like, it probably didn't even need to be that skinny, but still, like, there were no skinny chinos in America, right? So it all kind of happened at the same time frame. So it took years for me to develop it. First, it was like not a garment dyed pant or a twill. It just kind of evolved as a product. But when I relaunched the collection after I started, it was super tight. It was like 7 pieces or something like that. So every piece needed to count. And then when I fast forward to when we started doing a garment dyed version of this pant, I just did a tailored fitting pant, which fit really well, and it turned into a chino, right? So that's why there were it was a button fly, and it has, you know, it wasn't a low rise, you know, because low rise pants were really big. I actually was against a low rise for a guy, like, and one of the reasons why this pant fits so well, and we're coming off of super hard denim, you know, yes, there was skinny denim and all this other stuff. But when all of a sudden guys took a break from denim and went into this really comfortable chino, they were just like, oh my God, you know? And so I think that it was the perfect storm for a change in pants. And that was also around the time that there was a New York Times article. It was called The Critical Shopper. I was down in Miami doing this new age thing with this like psychic, you know, I was like, what am I supposed to do with my life? Should I keep doing this thing, having this company? This is crazy. This is the hardest thing. Every year you say that to yourself when you have your own business. And the New York Times article came out, and I didn't even have a copy. My old partner read me the article, and I just started crying because it was just so amazing, you know? And like the outpour of love, and people, like, again, this is like pre-internet. Like, people had to run down to the store to try to get stuff, you know? And then we started to launch our website and the GQ CFDA nomination. And I was, you know, I'm honored to be the first woman nominated for Best Menswear. I mean, you know, I was in the running, and I know that in our group, like, there was a New York Times writer and the judging panel, and it was Billy Reed ended up winning, and he's a lovely man. He totally deserved it. And but I think that there was this thing that they were like, oh my God, she might actually win. And people were rooting for me. And because I think so many of the New York editors knew just how, like, my path was never easy. It was never easy, you know, especially going through 9/11 and everything else. So when you're up for something like that, it's super hard, but the amount of press they dedicate to the designers was huge. So the same questions were asked of me. Why should you win? You know, what makes you different? And I had to really think about those questions. And I was like, I make the best fucking pants, you know, or I'm a woman and I know what guys want, you know. And and the funny thing is as I as I knew, it's like I didn't know those answers until like those questions were asked of me. Do you know what I mean? You just kind of plow along doing your thing, and that's how this pant became huge, because once GQ did that thing, then details. It's like having this advertisement that you couldn't afford to pay for as a small company, like a gigantic page with, you know, or 2 double page spread of just your chinos. Like, who gets that? And I'm like this tiny little designer in downtown New York. But I do think that you know, editors and magazine editors really appreciate craft, and, you know, if you have a taste level, all of those things, there's no reason, like, I didn't generate a ton of press, but they really supported me and the brands, because I think they knew, you know, they knew, one, I had really great product, and that the brand itself was really cool.
How does a brand take advantage of a moment like that? You know, when, you know, like, 'cause now you almost see like it happens, not frequently, but there's, you know, brands will get a
Yes.
viral moment or a moment on the internet. How do you take advantage of that and use that to leverage yourself up to the next level?
It's crazy, because I actually think that I never was able to do that. So I could have probably sold millions of those pants, but I just had no money. I'd have production disasters galore, where we were like processing pants ourselves to fix it, you know, you name it, like all of it happened. What probably you should do, as if this moment is about to happen, is you find money as soon as possible, because otherwise you're unable to scale it at all. And timing is everything. If you wait too long, someone's going to knock you off, and that's exactly what happened. And it's okay. You know, that's the thing is, you know, you're like, of course that's going to happen. It's a trend, right? Like, but what pissed me off was when someone knocked it off exactly. You know, you're like, you couldn't have thought of a little thing to change. Do you know what I mean? Like, you couldn't have just changed the tab or the shape of the tab or something, you know? So yeah. But yeah, it's hard that your brand is so precious. Like, the thought to, because you're not ready. No one's ready for it. Like, so how can you be ready? Is a good question that I still don't have the answer to.
And so for about 2.5 years, you've been at the North Face. What was kind of your, what kind of drew you to making that transition? And how did you make that transition?
I think the biggest thing is that, you know, one, I'm a menswear designer, and, you know, that's my origin. I'm from New York. I lived most of my life, over 30 something years, on the island. And I worked for DKNY in an era where the North Face was huge. The entire team wore North Face. We knocked it off, like, you name it. You know what I mean? So when Tim called me, I was like, wait a second, like, I have to do this. Like, there's no ands, ifs, or buts. It just felt like, for me, it just felt like it was a full circle thing, especially having basically worshiped the product in the mid 90s. I still have product I purchased from them in my closet, you know, from that period. So yeah. And it's still there. It's still working. It's still.
And from a business point, like, how did you like divest yourself from your namesake brand?
Yeah. That was a whole conversation when I first came on, because I was like, do I have to actually step away from UNIS? And they were like, yes, you have to step away. And I was like, I'm not even a competitor. We're like tiny. You know what I mean? I specialize in chinos. You don't do chinos. But like, I soon discovered there was no way I would have been able to do both exactly, because it was all like 7 a.m. at work, out at 10, you know, like, it was crazy hours, just because, you know, when Tim came on, it was all about change. You know what I mean? We had to change the product. We had to elevate it. There was just a lot to do. So it was an exciting time. You know, it was hard work, but also really an amazing, exciting time to be a part of the team that helps, you know, take the North Face into the next place.
could you give me almost like an example of like one piece of product that, you know, you've worked on for the North Face, and kind of like what, how you've been involved in it, and then how we've seen it proliferate in the world?
Well, one of the biggest reasons why Tim brought me on was she's like, she's a pant expert. And he kept saying that to me like at every meeting. And I was like, oh my God, the pressure, you know, this is a $2.5 billion company. I'm like, stop saying that. But so it was interesting because it wasn't like I could walk in and do whatever the hell I wanted to do, you know, at the North Face. It was like a constant conversation. And I think that was my biggest learning lesson, and that it is a process. Like there, you know, most people may not know this about the North Face, but one of the founding members developed probably the first lifetime warranty for apparel and equipment. Because they didn't want to put more crap into our landfills. You know, you wanted to build products that lasts a lifetime, and that goes for all of our products. And so I feel like, you know, I feel like the process for sportswear to like, how do I change pants for the North Face? Like it took me a minute. And like the honest truth was like, I wasn't successful that first year figuring it out at all. Like, you know, we were just still hiring the entire design staff. You know, what we did focus on is how do we improve the fits? How do we improve just like little things, like, you know, and constantly asking ourselves, you know, what is our point of view in, say, bottoms as an example. So, you know, we are an outerwear company. And what we wanted to focus on, and we still continue to focus on, is how do we balance that as a company? How do we develop amazing sportswear that people want to come to us for, instead of just our Nupsy, as an example? And so that's the path that we're on now. And yeah, I'm still learning, actually. And, you know, yeah, if it's not my, that's probably the biggest thing. It's not my company. What I want to do is, how do I design for the North Face? This is such an incredible, iconic brand, and that's everybody's goal here. You know, we tell everyone, even who comes in from high fashion, you know, like one of the reasons why we're hiring you is because of your taste level and everything else, but you also have to realize you're designing for, you know, the world's most iconic outdoor brand.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I guess, you know, right now we're in a moment where there's a lot of talk about diversity in fashion. And I think sometimes some people, you know, at least like from my perspective, they might talk about race or gender as almost like an obstacle that is needed to overcome. But sometimes I like talking about it as like an advantage or a unique perspective that you can have, or something special that you can bring to the situation. Like for you, being a woman in menswear, being an Asian American woman, having an immigrant background, how are some of those things, do those things ever give you like a unique perspective or ability to move in different worlds and bring something different to the work that you do?
I think so. It's funny because I don't know if other New Yorkers feel this way. It's such a melting pot in New York that like I never felt like I was different. Do you know what I mean? Like we were just one big melting pot. And it is weirder coming to a city like Denver, which is super white, you know, and not being able to kind of even just absorb that like amazing vibe and, you know, what's happening, you know, just by walking down the street. Like you don't get that. But as a woman, I feel like what I've learned to do and have trained myself to do through my experience in menswear is like, I need to listen to what people want. Like, what do consumers want? And at the same time as balancing, like, how do we get, it's not just what the average consumer wants. We need to keep moving things forward. If we constantly listen to what the suburban mom wants, like she doesn't know what she wants. She's looking after the kids. Like we need to figure out like what, you know, what are the little steps? But that's how I thought of that's how I designed Eunice too. When I think about it, it's like listening to what guys want and how do I give it? Because at the end of the day, I need to pay rent. I need it to be commercial. I need, I know there were some things that I'd sprinkle in at the top that were not that weren't going to sell, because the draw is this, but I still need the sprinkle on the top to bring customers in. It's that kind of that kind of thing. But I think in the outdoor industry, and I know there's been a lot of criticism of it, is that it is very white male dominated. And I think, again, I love all these conversations. This is like, I love having that there is a focus on women and people of color. And we should continue to have these conversations, so that how else are we going to change the industry? So I think there is a commitment to a brand, to even an organization like VF, to making sure that happens. But it's also people like me that have to keep the organization accountable too. So I think that's important, an important thing.
Definitely. So everybody, like I said before, we're going to be taking some questions from the audience. So if you guys want to keep sending that stuff in, I have one more question to ask, and then I'll turn to the audience. The last thing I wanted to ask you, Eunice, is listening to, your story. There's so many valleys and peaks, different things happen, whether it's 9/11 or, just different things that happen during your trajectory. If you have any advice for young designers and how they can weather those ups and downs, and what is the best thing that you've learned from these different shifts and changes that you've had in this industry?
I mean, I think it's okay to take time off. Like this COVID thing, none of us can control what's happening. You know what I mean? And there is no control over this. And if you literally can't afford to do it anymore, just pause, take a break, stop, start a new company later, whatever it needs to be. Like, your creative soul can still march on without this thing. Like, it's almost like, I guess the store felt like also a marriage, or like, a child in some way. I can't abandon this physical space. That's how what it felt like to me. But I do feel like, for the brand, it was the right thing to do to close the store. I know from my experience in 9/11, like, it's going to take years. And are you going to have enough cash to do that? Or how much debt do you actually want to get into to keep your business alive? I don't know what is it really worth it? What's really worth it for you? And I do think that there is no failure, right? Because you're the badass that's decided you were going to freaking go and do it in the first place. So there is no failure. So don't ever look at it like that at all. And that your that energy just apply to something else, So I think that's probably my biggest advice. Like, it's all financial. If you can afford to stay open, then stay open. If you can afford, you think, to go into debt, then go into debt. If you can't, my advice is probably don't go into debt. It's hard because it's also like your livelihood. This is how you pay rent. What are you going to do? I've had all those questions and thoughts, and for myself over the years, because it wasn't just 9/11. It was the blackout. It was the 2008 crisis, financial crash. It was all of those things, yeah.
That kind of leads us into a question from Holly Williams, who asked, when you had no money, how did you manage the production to execute?
I would beg, borrow, and steal, basically. That's how it felt like. I was just like begging my parents or begging the factory, please, can you just give us an extra day, or can you ship, da-da-da-da. That was the main reason why I was so late with my production. This is the killer of businesses, is the cash flow, and I never had the cash flow. I think people always think like, Eunice was way bigger than, the business really was. I really was a tiny, tiny brand that always struggled with cash flow. And it's okay to say that, yeah.
And from Essence, Bailey, she's asking, how did you network for production? Did you attend events for materials and fabric sourcing?
when I first started, I used an agent in Asia, and I was thinking, why did I even go to Asia? My production was so small. And after the 2008 crash, I started to do things in America, because it felt like that there was a direct correlation to manufacturing at home. I think a lot of us people in menswear moved a lot of our production at home, and there was value in made in America. So I wanted to work smarter, and I ended up working with more Japanese trading companies that you're like, don't overcut. Inventory is going to kill you, as a small brand. So you don't want to be left over with inventory you can't sell, because it's just money sitting on the shelf. So what I decided to do was just say, let's buy one roll in every color and cut that, instead of buying like hundreds of yards of something that you anticipate cutting. It's better to sell out than to be sitting with inventory, is just my advice. So I used people like Takio and Zentex, and, I'd even go rummaging through, like, there was a MJ Con or something. There were all these other little places where you could find smaller yardage purchases that you can make, that is just smarter for smaller brands. Like, don't think that you're gonna, and even with my Geo, it's one fabric that I did the Geo, then the Geo Skinny, then the Fort, like all these other pants, one quality. And, that mill, it's an Italian mill, and we have a long-standing relationship. So they let me slide sometimes when I was super late paying them. I'd be like begging, please, let me go another month. Yeah.
Joe wanted to know, did you ever consider selling UNIS, and were you ever approached by someone who wanted to buy the biz?
No one ever wanted to buy the biz. I'm just being honest, like, I wish they had. I think I obviously did want to bring in investors at some point, but it's so weird because there have been moments where I think, why didn't I do that back then? Why wasn't I more aggressive about that? And that's the thing that kills us designers who end up having why are all the tech companies like the Everlanes doing so well? Because it's not about this cherished little thing that we don't want to give away. And that was what it was like for me for many, many years. But looking back now, I was like, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I freaking sell half of it or more than half of it and grow? We get so too emotionally attached to the brand, where we're the ones partially financially holding it back.
Here's a question from LOL Shen. She says, or they say, what is your suggestion for recent graduates who want a job in the sportswear industry at the moment? I feel there is a huge gap between fashion education and the active performance wear industry.
I mean, that's true because, and it's funny because I think we are, again, like, I think it's so unfortunate. COVID's kind of put a pause on a lot of things, but we have been talking about how do we get, internship programs, things like that for a company like VF and the North Face. And we should do that. And we should work towards bringing people of color in these internships. But again, I think, it's up to me and people like me to continue to have these conversations internally to make that happen. So hopefully those kinds of things will happen soon, because, we can't let this COVID thing keep us all down forever,
Absolutely. And Owen Kelly wants to know, what inspires you now? Brands, people, music?
What inspires me now? It's funny because in my current new role, I'm in charge of collabs. So it's all encompassing. It takes up half my time, and that's a tiny part financially of what I'm responsible for. And, but it has been so interesting working on collabs because it's such a mashup of, like, how do you bring two brands together? And I think there's things about that. And again, that's just because it's a recent shift in my role, that's been an amazing, fun thing for me to do. And also New York is always inspiring. And I was just back there heartbreaking, also sad, like, just how many homeless people there are, how many people are on food lines, but like also a sense of community feels so important to me. And it always has, because of where my store was, who my neighbors were, helping each other. Those are the kind of things that feel incredibly important and inspiring for me right now.
That's awesome. And I think the last one is going to come from Robin Orrit. They ask, what would you say to young women starting off in a creative job within a sportswear brand that is predominantly male, especially when the goal is to get to a creative director level?
Wait, so ask that question one more time.
What would you say to young women starting off in a creative job within a sportswear brand that is predominantly male, especially when the goal is to get to a director level?
Well, I think, that was my entire career. Granted, I had my own brand and everything else, but I do think, like, you'd be surprised how many women are actually on top, as vice presidents of divisions of things. In menswear, I personally know quite a few vice presidents of, menswear companies. And I think the biggest thing is, I have to say, one of the biggest things that I want everyone to do if they are terrible public speakers like I am, is go get yourself a public speaking class. Because I can't even tell you, in this environment, especially in a corporate environment, is you have to own the stage. So, Tim threw me in and he was just like, go talk about X, Y, and Z. But I just realized just how terrible this is a comfortable format for me because you guys are like in little boxes. But imagine being thrown in front of 150 people and you have to talk about a season and you're just thinking, oh my God, kill me now. And like, I just anxiety attacks. So I had to work so hard memorizing what I had to say and how I said it, because I would trip myself up because I was so nervous talking about stuff. So I literally, for designers, if you could go and get a public speaking, just get coaching, go to free online classes. There's a company that Warren Buffett said he took way back in the day. And my friend Galen said what that was. Maybe if he's here, maybe put it in the chat or something. But it's like that, I have to say, is probably one of the biggest reasons why some people get really far, is because it's how you communicate. And how you communicate to upper leadership with confidence. That would be my biggest thing that I would suggest for any woman, male, like creative person, because we're in our own heads. Like we need to be able to be super comfortable. Like it's conversational. It comes natural. Like I'm talking to you guys in front of a stage. But trust me, this feels like I'm super confident doing this. But if you put me in front of a stage, I'd be like frozen still. So yeah. If you can do it at an earlier age, the better.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Eunice, for your time.
Thank you.
I mean, your story is incredible. And I think just like on a personal level, like when I came to New York City, your store was like one of the stores. I was like, I got to actually go to this store and check it out, being a part of a community of guys who like menswear and fashion. Your store was always one of the ones that we were like, yo, when we get to Soho, we need to stop there and see what's up and check out the sweatshirts and everything. So, you built a beautiful thing with that, and the stuff you're doing North Face is incredible. So thank you so much for sharing all that insight, and hope everybody who tuned in enjoyed this conversation. All the donations that you made are going to go towards the Joe's Blackbook Scholarship Foundation, which supports emerging creative talent, which is awesome. And definitely check us out on Thursday, October 29th, when I'll be moderating another one of these sessions with my man, Willie Chavaria, who is a fantastic menswear designer. And it's going to be a great talk. And I hope to see y'all again. Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.